The periscope glass trembled slightly as the moon's reflection shimmered across its convex surface, casting a silver gleam through the darkened control room. Lieutenant Commander Elias H. Morton, commanding officer of USS Skate, SS 305, leaned close, eyes narrowing, the lines of his face etched by years of midnight watches and distant convoys. The faint phosphorescence danced across the periscope's head, twisting with the gentle undulation of the sea. To the untrained eye, it was merely a ripple. To Morton, it was a map, a signal, a warning. The moon, the water, the reflected gleam, they spoke to him in ways that instruments no longer could. A depth charge had detonated nearby only hours before, sending shockwaves through the hull. The Skate had risen from 200 feet of darkness to a near-fatal 90 feet before Morton had ordered a deeper dive, relying on manual triangulation and instinct. The sonar, once the crew's dependable ear, had failed. The high-frequency pings, which usually cut through the rolling swell of the South Pacific, now lay dead, a mangled wire and a burned-out oscillator. Radar, too, had succumbed to the concussive blasts the black box at the bow rendered useless. The submarine was alive only in memory and the faint glimmer of reflected moonlight. Around him, the crew moved quietly. Electric hums from emergency lights offered the only illumination, painting their faces in red and green shadows. The air smelled of diesel and salt, warm and suffocating. Sweat beaded along the foreheads of the young seamen as they clutched the steel handrails, listening to the hull groan under pressure. None spoke. Voices were forbidden under Morton's strict silence protocol. Even a whisper could betray their location to Japanese destroyers prowling the waters above. Morton straightened, his gaze locked on the periscope. He had studied these waters for months, noting the faintest irregularities in the waves, the subtle shifts in reflected moonlight on the hulls of passing ships. Here, in the Solomons, night could conceal or betray, and Morton had learned to see in the dark. The Skate's mission was audacious. Intercept a Japanese convoy, moving from Rabaul to Truk, without sonar, without radar, without the usual safety nets. Most captains would have called it suicide. Morton saw it differently. He called it precision. "Bring us to periscope depth," he said, his voice calm, almost casual, though the words carried weight. Lieutenant Sanders, his executive officer, hesitated only a fraction of a second before obeying, twisting the handwheel and adjusting ballast. The submarine rose slowly, cutting through the inky black water, her metal skin glinting under the reflection of the moon. Below deck, sailors secured torpedoes and plotted bearings by hand. Charts, compasses, and plotting tables were their only guide now. Morton moved between stations, hands resting lightly on consoles, eyes flicking to every glint, every shadow. His crew had come to trust his intuition, some even feared it. There was a quiet understanding that this was a man who had survived encounters others could not, who had once pressed an attack against 3 destroyers with nothing but a few torpedoes and a stubborn will. A faint phosphorescent trail appeared on the horizon, curling and fading with the motion of the convoy. Morton's periscope caught the subtle glimmer, a reflection from a freighter's deck, disturbed by the rolling waves. "There," he whispered. His fingers traced a line in the air, as if drawing the trajectory the convoy would follow. The crew followed his gestures silently, adjusting their calculations. The reflection danced again from the side of a tanker this time, silvered under the moon. Morton's mind moved faster than any machine, projecting the angles, the speeds, the evasive patterns. The depth charges above had forced the Japanese into tighter formation. Their panic betrayed in small hesitations. Morton did not rejoice. He only noted the opportunity, the opening created by circumstance, and calculated. His mind was a compass, his instinct sharpened by years of war and solitude beneath the waves. Below deck, Sanders glanced at Morton. "Sir, you're certain?" he asked quietly. Morton did not answer immediately. He did not need to. In this darkness, words were less useful than observation. He had learned to read the sea, the periscope's reflection, the subtlest flicker of light on the horizon. The convoy would reveal itself if he watched long enough, and he had the patience of a cat stalking its prey. The hull creaked as Skate adjusted her depth. Morton raised the periscope higher, catching more of the moon's reflection, letting the light fall across the water's surface like a silver arrow. He followed the wavering line, noting each ripple, each shadow, the smallest hint of movement. There, a glint, a sign, a momentary flare that betrayed a Japanese freighter cutting through the waves. Morton's jaw tightened. "Mark her," he said, pointing, voice soft but definitive. The crew moved to obey, plotting lines and bearings on the table, their pencils scratching across the charts. The submarine's instruments were dead, but their minds were alive. They worked in silence, each man attuned to Morton's instructions, to the light, to the pulse of the ocean. Above, the moon traced its slow path, indifferent to the mortal concerns below. Morton lingered at the periscope, watching the convoy. He did not allow himself fear. Fear was a luxury, observation was not. Every ship, every deck, every funnel reflected in the periscope told a story: speed, heading, weight, vulnerability. He memorized it all, storing it for the attack he was about to undertake. This would be a chase unlike any other, a battle fought not with sonar or radar, but with light itself. At last, he straightened, signaling Sanders to prepare the attack plan. "We move in by reflection," Morton said, his voice carrying an almost imperceptible edge of thrill. Sanders' eyebrows rose, a flicker of doubt passing before he nodded. The crew, sensing the gravity of the command, redoubled their focus. The Skate would follow the convoy into the night, tracing the silvery glint of moonlight on steel decks, stalking ships like shadows beneath the water. The phosphorescence along the hull shimmered once more as the submarine rose closer to periscope depth. Morton's eyes met the silver streaks, and for a moment, time seemed suspended. He thought of the crews he had faced before, the impossibility of this mission, the stakes resting upon a fragile glass lens and a reflection. Yet he felt no hesitation, only the rhythm of the sea, the quiet trust in his men, and the certainty that the reflection never lies. As the Skate cut through the water, the moonlight flickering across the periscope, Morton whispered to himself, almost as if addressing the ocean itself, "Let them see me only as glass and light. We will hunt by reflection. And none shall know until it is too late." Below deck, the sailors braced themselves. Above, the stars wheeled silently, witnesses to the beginning of a chase that would become legend. In the black of the Solomon Sea, with only a periscope and the glint of moonlight to guide them, the Skate and her captain began their impossible pursuit. The hunt had begun. The submarine shuddered under pressure as it maintained periscope depth. Lieutenant Commander Elias H. Morton had learned long ago that silence was survival. The hum of the electric motors was barely perceptible, masked by the lapping waves against the hull. The Skate moved like a shadow beneath the water, every creak of steel a note in a symphony of tension. The previous depth charge had damaged more than the sonar. It had left a persistent vibration in the hull, a low-frequency resonance the crew called the broken ear. Morton listened carefully. The sound could mean structural compromise, a subtle leak, or the presence of enemy destroyers. He had faced it before, in the waters off Truk and Bougainville, and he knew the warning well. One miscalculation, one ignored vibration, and the sea would swallow the submarine whole. "Status on the convoy?" Morton asked, his hand resting lightly on the periscope stand. "Still visible, sir," Lieutenant Sanders replied, tracing a trembling pencil along the plotting table. 3 freighters, 1 escort, bearing 270, speed 7 knots. They're adjusting formation. Morton's eyes narrowed. The convoy was cautious, unnervingly so. They had clearly felt the reverberations of the depth charge, and their escort was tight, circling in a deliberate pattern designed to detect the smallest hint of submersible movement. It was the classic hunter's dance, destroyer against submarine, steel against steel. But Morton did not rely on standard tactics. He had no sonar, no radar. His ears and eyes would guide him, and above all, the faint, silver reflections of moonlight across the decks. The broken ear thrummed again. Morton felt it through the soles of his boots and the knuckles of his fingers, a subtle vibration threading through the steel of the skate. He moved to the engine room, crouching over the muffled hum of diesel and electric drives. Chief Petty Officer Hawkins, hands blackened with oil, looked up. "Vibrations coming from aft, sir," Hawkins reported. "Could be a hull seam. Could be. Check everything. Every seam. Every brace." "I want no surprises," Morton interrupted. "Even a whisper of failure will get us killed tonight." Hawkins nodded, moving with practiced efficiency. The crew followed, inspecting the hull, listening for resonance, tapping panels with their knuckles like medics checking pulses. Below, the submarine was a coffin, a metallic womb of tension and diesel fumes, alive only through the discipline of men who had chosen to place themselves in harm's way. Morton returned to the control room, eyes flicking back to the periscope. The convoy had shifted slightly, adjusting to the waves. He could see the reflection of a funnel, the silvered edges of cargo decks, the glint of lifeboats secured on davits. Every detail mattered. Every moment of observation sharpened the image in his mind. Speed, course, hull type, potential weak points. The Japanese crews were disciplined, methodical, but the ocean had its own rules, and Morton intended to exploit them. "Sir," Sanders said softly, "I'm reading a slight zigzag pattern in the convoy. Could be evasive or they're being herded." Morton finished. His hand tightened around the periscope. "They've felt us, but they don't know what we're capable of. They see shadows, perhaps ghosts. That is our advantage. Keep plotting the bearings. We'll use it." He studied the moonlight reflection on the water. A faint shimmer along the port side of the lead freighter revealed a subtle movement, the result of wake currents combined with moonlight hitting a metal hatch. Morton leaned closer. Every reflection was a clue, every glint a vector. If he could maintain visual contact, he could calculate the convoy's exact speed and distance. No instrument could replace the human eye trained by hours of midnight watches and months of stealth patrols. The broken ear thrummed again, more insistent. Morton paused. The hull vibrated at a frequency too low for normal concern but too persistent to ignore. Hawkins reported no leaks, no structural compromise beyond minor flexing. Morton dismissed it, though not entirely. It was part of the gamble, the high-wire act of pursuing a convoy with no traditional means. Each vibration reminded him of the fragility of the mission, of the razor's edge they walked between audacity and disaster. Hours passed in near silence. Below deck, the crew rotated stations, eyes straining in dim red, light, fingers tracing lines and bearings across charts. Morton alternated between periscope and plotting table, moving in a slow, deliberate rhythm that kept him connected to both the machine and the men around him. Every few minutes, he would glance aft, feeling the broken ear, measuring the pulse of the submarine against the pulse of the sea. Finally, the convoy made a subtle error. A tanker, slightly slower than the rest, fell out of formation by a fraction of a knot. The escort did not notice immediately, focused on sweeping ahead. Morton's hand moved almost imperceptibly over the periscope wheel, adjusting elevation to catch the faintest glint off the tanker's bow. "There," he whispered. "Mark her speed. Mark her course." Sanders did so, pencil trembling slightly. The moment was delicate, ephemeral. A shadow would pass, a cloud might obscure the moon, and the opportunity would vanish. Morton's mind raced through calculations, estimating range, bearing, and speed using only the periscope reflections and knowledge of how each hull would interact with waves and moonlight. He projected the tanker's trajectory, anticipating evasive maneuvers, noting potential blind spots in the escort's patrol pattern. Suddenly, a faint clatter from above, a wave breaking against the hull, or perhaps the echo of a destroyer's sonar ping set the crew on edge. Morton remained calm. "Ignore it. Focus on what is in front of you. The water is telling us more than any steel box can." Minutes later, the Skate was perfectly positioned. Morton gave the silent order for torpedoes to be prepared. The crew moved with efficiency, born of trust, loading tubes with deliberate care. Hawkins reported minor vibration in the aft section had stabilized. The broken ear remained, but it would not deter them. Morton did not flinch. The hunt required patience, observation, and daring, and all three were present in abundance. As the moon climbed higher, the convoy's reflection shifted again. Morton adjusted the periscope, tracking not only the tanker but the patterns of light and shadow along the other freighters. He saw subtle movements, slight hesitations in steering, and slight deviations in speed. Each was an opening, a hint at the vulnerability that Morton had come to exploit. The periscope's glass became more than a lens. It was a window into strategy, into human error, into the inevitability of a precise strike. Finally, Morton signaled Sanders. "We have her." All bearings confirmed. "Prepare for attack at first light." He lowered the periscope slowly, watching the last glint fade across the water's surface. Below, the crew exhaled quietly, the tension easing just slightly. But Morton remained alert. The broken ear thrummed faintly, the submarine alive in its metallic cocoon, waiting for the moment when observation would give way to action. Tonight, the Skate would hunt by light alone. Guided not by machines, but by the intuition of a captain who saw the sea in ways others could not. Every reflection, every shimmer, every movement of the water and hull was a signpost. And as the submarine drifted silently beneath the moonlit waves, Morton knew that the hunt had only just begun. The 24th of July, 1943, Solomon Sea, near New Ireland. The first faint rays of dawn barely touched the horizon when Lieutenant Commander Elias H. Morton allowed himself a measured breath. The ocean, previously a mirror of moonlight and shadow, now glimmered with the soft warmth of the rising sun. But to Morton, light was neither friend nor foe, it was merely a tool, one more element to be understood and exploited. Through the periscope, he observed the convoy's subtle shifts. The tanker, still separated from its escorts by the channel's narrow breadth, moved with predictable hesitation, forced by the currents and the invisible pressure of the submarine lurking beneath. The freighters maintained formation, the destroyer patrolling ahead, unaware of the precise predator in their midst. "Prepare torpedo tubes 1 and 3, Morton commanded. His voice was calm, steady an anchor for a crew taut with anticipation. The men moved like clockwork. Hawkins inspected the primed tubes once more, fingers brushing the cold steel, checking alignment and depth settings. Sanders double-checked range calculations, plotting an intercept using only the faint glimmer of reflected sunlight from the tanker's superstructure. Morton's method was almost surgical. He did not rely on sonar disabled by prior depth charges nor radar, knocked out in the early stages of their approach. Instead, he trusted reflection and light, an optical ballet across the ripples of the ocean. His periscope, an instrument as vital as any weapon, scanned the horizon inch by inch, the faint glints off railings and deck fittings translating into trajectories in Morton's mind. "Steady," he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. The Skate hovered in silence, the hum of the electric motors barely audible, the hull immersed in a faint phosphorescent glow from the disturbed water. Every creak of the submarine, every faint vibration, was catalogued in Morton's mind, but the focus remained on the enemy above. The tanker, now clearly within the periscope's arc, revealed a critical opening. Its stern reflected the sunlight at a slightly sharper angle, evidence of a minor course correction. Morton seized it. "Now," he said. The torpedoes launched in near-perfect synchrony, slipping silently into the sun-dappled water. Morton's eyes did not leave the periscope. The reflections on the tanker's hull confirmed the trajectory, each glint a silent confirmation of their deadly arc. Seconds stretched into eternity as the weapons sped through the channel, invisible yet inevitable. A muffled tremor ran through the submarine as the torpedoes neared their target. Through the periscope, Morton saw the first impact and explosion, tearing through the tanker's stern. Water and flame erupted in a violent bloom, the reflection scattering into silver fragments across the Skate's lens. The tanker's forward motion faltered, then ceased entirely, listing slightly under the force of the attack. "Excellent," Morton said softly. The crew exhaled as if in unison, tension momentarily giving way to satisfaction. But the hunt was far from over. The destroyer would soon detect the attack, and the convoy's remaining ships had to be accounted for. "Track the freighter on the port side," Morton instructed. "Maintain depth, silent running. Do not engage the escorts unless necessary." The Skate glided beneath the surface, invisible. Morton adjusted the periscope angle, observing how sunlight reflected off the freighter's hull, catching the subtle change in bearing caused by evasive maneuvers. Each reflection, each ripple, was a message to Morton, a code in light that only he could read. Hawkins adjusted the torpedo tubes for the next shot, carefully recalibrating the depth and trajectory based on Morton's estimations. Sanders continued plotting, pencil moving rapidly across the charts, translating glints into vectors and probabilities. The freighter, realizing the danger, began a zigzag pattern, attempting to throw off any attacks. But Morton had anticipated this. He noted the angles where sunlight hit deck equipment, the faint shimmer of the railing catching the light as the ship rolled slightly. Calculating speed and vector, he launched the next torpedo. A quiet ripple against the blue water, invisible, untraceable. The explosion came seconds later. Fire and smoke billowed from the freighter, its deck torn open in a violent reflection of Morton's precision. Crewmen scrambled, shouting in panic, but the channel's constraints prevented effective maneuvering. The Skate remained below, ghostly and untouchable, its presence betrayed only by the devastation above. Morton allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. His strategy, unconventional and daring, had worked, yet he knew the destroyer would soon sweep the channel, sonar scanning for any anomaly. Every moment of triumph was tempered with caution. "Prepare for evasion," Morton warned. "Depth 50 feet, course parallel to the channel's edge. They will attempt a counterattack." The destroyer's sonar pinged faintly, a sound the crew could feel more than hear. The Skate responded with subtle adjustments, altering course and depth to remain undetected. Morton observed the water through the periscope, noting how reflected light off the destroyer's hull shifted with every movement. Every reflection, every ripple was data, a tool for survival. Hours passed in this tense ballet. The remaining freighters, shaken and damaged, altered course to escape the channel. Morton tracked each movement meticulously, ensuring no ship could slip undetected, no opportunity lost. Finally, as the sun climbed higher, the convoy dispersed, the threat of immediate counterattack diminished. Morton allowed himself a rare nod of satisfaction. The Skate, despite its vulnerability and the near impossibility of the mission, had emerged victorious. Using only the periscope's reflections, a fragile thread of light on the waves, one man had guided a deadly ballet that destroyed multiple enemy vessels and sent a clear message to the Pacific theater. "Report damage and confirm kills," Morton instructed. "And remain at periscope depth until we are well clear of this channel." The crew worked silently, noting the destruction and preparing for the submarine's continued patrol. The Skate had achieved what many thought impossible. A convoy neutralized using nothing but the reflections of light on water, guided by the audacity and skill of one mad captain. As the morning sun shimmered across the calm waters, Morton lowered the periscope. The ocean, once a mirror of moonlight and shadow, now gleamed with the consequences of his daring. The reflections that had guided him through the night were gone, replaced by the calm, deceptive serenity of victory. In the tight confines of the submarine, Morton allowed himself a brief smile. The mission, like the reflections he relied upon, had been a delicate balance of precision, patience, and courage. The Skate and her crew had survived the impossible, leaving behind only the silent testimony of their skill and the wreckage of those who had underestimated the power of one determined captain. The silver strike was complete. The sea had returned to an uneasy calm. But Morton knew better than to trust appearances. From the Skate's narrow vantage, the destroyer's shadow stretched across the water like a predator waiting for its prey. Even as the convoy's survivors disappeared into the distance, the danger had not passed. The enemy would soon search for the submarine that had struck with such precision, and Morton's skill alone would determine whether they survived the night. "Depth 50 feet, he ordered. "Silent running, maintain periscope discipline, only quick checks at dawn and dusk." His voice, steady and controlled, carried the authority of a man who had stared death in the eye countless times. Below, the crew responded with the practiced efficiency of men who had learned to rely on instinct, training, and the sharp mind of their commander. The destroyer's sonar began the search almost immediately after the convoy dispersed. Pings bounced faintly through the hull, a rhythmic, pulsing menace. Hawkins adjusted the submarine's ballast to counter the motion, careful not to disturb the water too much. Sanders monitored the readings, noting subtle changes in sonar frequency, interpreting what little information they could extract. Morton's method of evasion was unconventional. Traditional doctrine called for sharp dives, erratic course changes, and silent running at maximum depth. Morton, however, relied on subtlety, on small corrections informed by the faint reflections of light and shadow on the periscope's lens. Even at night, faint moonlight provided cues, the faint shimmer of phosphorescence off the destroyer's hull, the way the water's surface moved in reaction to their search patterns. The first depth charges fell at 0300. Morton had anticipated the pattern. The water vibrated with the first blasts, pressure waves hammering the Skate's hull. Men gripped the rails, knuckles white, teeth clenched. The submarine shuddered violently, then settled, leaving only the distant echoes of the explosions vibrating through the hull. "Steady," Morton commanded. He did not move to the periscope. It was too dangerous. Instead, he trusted the subtle signs, the shifting currents, the way the bubbles from previous dives reflected faintly in the rising moonlight. Each signal was a silent guide, a hint of where the destroyer's search was most concentrated. Another salvo of depth charges followed. The crew felt each detonation as a brutal reminder of mortality. The Skate rocked under the waves, the hull creaking with the stress. Morton remained unshaken, calculating vectors, adjusting depth in increments, never rushing, never panicking. Every movement had a purpose, every correction precise. Hawkins muttered a prayer under his breath. "I thought we were done after the convoy." His voice trailed off as another tremor shook the submarine. Morton's eyes never left the periscope. He understood the rhythm of the enemy. The destroyer's captain, trained but predictable, followed a pattern that Morton had seen many times before. Pings, maneuver, charge, pause, then repeat. By carefully observing the effects of their own movements on these patterns, Morton could anticipate the next salvo and slip between them like water itself. The hours stretched into an oppressive continuum. Every shadow on the water's surface, every whisper of reflected moonlight became a critical data point. Morton ordered a slight adjustment in depth, a mere 10 feet. But in the context of sonar detection, it was enough to evade a potentially fatal barrage. Finally, near 0600, Morton allowed a brief periscope check. The destroyer was still searching, its patterns now more frantic, desperate to locate the submarine that had struck so effectively. The Skate remained undetected, a phantom beneath the waves, guided not by brute force but by observation, intuition, and a profound understanding of light, water, and motion. Morton's mind, ever calculating, began preparing for escape. The nearest safe harbour was still hundreds of nautical miles away, and the submarine could not remain in the channel indefinitely. He studied the reflections on the water, the faint shimmer of the sun now rising over the horizon, and plotted a course that would minimize exposure while maximizing speed. The destroyer's captain, frustrated and likely believing the submarine had moved out of the area, began to widen the search pattern. Morton recognized the shift immediately. A window had opened, small but sufficient. "Prepare to surface at dusk," Morton ordered. "We will make our move under the last light, silent running until then." The crew worked silently, knowing the stakes. Every decision, every minor correction of ballast, every whisper of orders was magnified by the risk of detection. For Morton, this was the true art of submarine warfare, not the torpedo strikes themselves, but the navigation through shadows, the evasion of a determined hunter. Night fell once again. Morton brought the Skate to periscope depth, just below the waves. Through the small lens, the moonlight reflected across the ocean, revealing the faint shapes of the destroyer and its search pattern. Morton adjusted their course, timing movements to coincide with the darkest moments between searchlights and sonar pulses. The destroyer fired its last depth charge of the night, a final warning that the hunt was not yet over. The Skate quivered, but the charge fell short, and Morton's calculations proved correct. The submarine slipped silently away, guided by the interplay of light, shadow, and instinct. By dawn, the destroyer had given up, returning to escort duties or heading back to port. The Skate remained submerged, the crew exhausted but alive. Morton allowed a rare moment of satisfaction, acknowledging the narrow margins by which they had survived. In the quiet that followed, he wrote in his log, "The 25th of July, 1943. The convoy neutralized. Evaded destroyer patrols using observation, reflection, and careful timing. Crew performed admirably. The submarine survives. The art of patience and perception proves as lethal as firepower." Morton closed the log and looked through the periscope one last time. The ocean was calm, deceptive in its serenity. Below, the submarine waited, a silent shadow beneath the waves, carrying men whose lives depended on the skill and courage of one captain who refused to be bound by convention. The Skate had survived the night of depth charges. The legend of the mad captain, who used periscope reflections and intuition to outwit the destroyers, would spread quietly among the fleet. In the Pacific theatre, where survival often depended on ingenuity and nerve, Morton's methods were a testament to the lethal potential of a mind unafraid to see war differently. The morning fog clung to the water like a shroud. Morton surveyed the horizon through the periscope, noting the faint silhouette of an enemy cargo ship lumbering westward, escorted by 2 destroyers. He allowed himself a brief moment of grim satisfaction. His previous strike against the convoy had left ripples of confusion in Japanese command, and now another opportunity presented itself. "Course plotted for intercept," Morton said, voice calm but firm. The crew responded with practiced efficiency, adjusting ballast and trim, preparing for silent running. Every movement was deliberate. The Skate had learned to move like a shadow beneath the waves, invisible to sonar, yet fully aware of its surroundings. The Japanese ships maintained a standard zigzag pattern, a precaution against submarine attack, but Morton had anticipated this. Through careful observation of periscope reflections, he traced the subtle glint of sunlight off the convoy's metal hulls, calculating speed and heading with nothing but light, shadow, and intuition. "Silent running," Morton ordered. "Depth 70 feet. Sonar off. No sounds above the hum of the engines." Below deck, the crew followed orders in near silence. The only sounds were the muted hiss of compressed air and the occasional metallic groan of the submarine adjusting to the pressure. Hawkins monitored the periscope lens, noting every reflection, every flicker that might indicate the enemy's position. Sanders calculated the angles, feeding Morton data that he could mentally translate into a firing solution. The first strike would require patience. Morton knew that rushing the attack would likely mean detection. He watched the convoy for hours, reading the subtle cues in the water's surface, the faint shimmer of phosphorescence, the angle of the sun on the ship's superstructure. Each variable mattered. Each second of hesitation potentially fatal or decisive. By midday, the Skate was in position. Morton brought the submarine to periscope depth, exposing the narrow lens above the waves. Through it, he could see the convoy in full 3 cargo vessels, 2 destroyers, and the endless expanse of open ocean. His mind raced through calculations, converting visual reflections into trajectory, range, and timing. "Prepare torpedoes," Morton ordered. "Target the lead cargo ship, Fire when ready. Timing is everything. The crew readied the Mark 14 torpedoes, a weapon infamous for mechanical unreliability but deadly when used with precision. Morton had accounted for the torpedoes' quirks, running depth, gyro settings, and magnetic detonators were all meticulously calibrated to his calculations. "Lead ship in sight," Hawkins reported, holding the periscope steady. Morton adjusted the lens slightly, aligning the reflection of sunlight on the ship's hull with the crosshair he had etched into memory. "Fire!" Morton commanded. The first torpedo left the tube with a muted blast. Morton watched as it cut through the water, invisible to the enemy, yet guided by calculation and chance. Seconds later, the impact detonated, sending a geyser of water and flame into the sky. The lead cargo ship shuddered violently before listing to port, flames licking the deck. The destroyers reacted immediately, zigzagging to avoid further torpedo fire. Morton used the distraction to his advantage, ordering a second torpedo launched at the central cargo ship. Another geyser of water and smoke erupted, engulfing the target. Japanese sailors scrambled on deck, firing anti-aircraft guns at nothing as the Skate remained invisible beneath the waves. Morton's strategy was both audacious and methodical. By using reflections, shadow, and timing, he could strike multiple targets without ever surfacing fully. The Japanese, though trained and disciplined, were reacting to an enemy they could not see. The destroyers, realizing the threat, began a coordinated search pattern, dropping depth charges in tight sequences. Morton anticipated this, diving the Skate to 90 feet, adjusting course and speed to follow the subtle changes in the water. Each charge sent a pulse through the hull, but the crew's nerves remained steady, guided by Morton's unshakable resolve. Hours passed in tense silence. Morton's eyes rarely left the periscope, translating the interplay of light, shadow, and movement into tactical decisions. He knew that one mistake, one misjudgment, would mean destruction. The sea, while appearing calm, was a battlefield shaped by offer, reflections, physics, and instinct. By late afternoon, the convoy was in disarray. 2 cargo ships burned, one listing heavily, and the destroyers were scattered in pursuit of phantom threats. Morton calculated the final move. The last ship, slow and vulnerable, would be the Skate's final target before retreating to safer waters. "Prepare the last torpedo," he ordered. The crew complied, hands steady despite the fatigue. Morton held the periscope steady, focusing on the faint glint off the ship's hull, timing the release with the subtle sway of the waves. The torpedo left the tube and struck with precision. Flames engulfed the target, smoke rising into the afternoon sky. Morton allowed a moment of grim satisfaction. His plan had worked flawlessly. The convoy had been neutralized without exposing the submarine to unnecessary risk. "Evasive maneuvers," Morton commanded. "Course northeast, maximum safe depth. Sonar off, we vanish beneath the waves." The Skate slipped silently away, leaving destruction behind yet unseen, a shadow beneath the surface. The crew allowed themselves quiet relief, knowing that each strike had been executed with precision and skill, and that survival depended on their commander's unique methods. Morton made notes in the log, concise and factual. The 27th of July, 1943. Convoy engagement complete. 3 cargo vessels disabled, escorts evaded. Tactics relied on visual observation and reflected light, sonar and radar unused. Crew performed admirably. Submarine intact. Enemy losses confirmed through post-action intelligence. As the submarine descended into the deep, Morton allowed himself a rare reflection. In the Pacific theater, victory often came not from brute force, but from creativity, patience, and an ability to see what others could not. The Skate, guided by a captain willing to trust instinct, mathematics, and observation over convention, had turned those principles into deadly reality. The day faded into evening, shadows, lengthening over the water's surface. Morton peered through the periscope one last time before submerging fully, knowing that the enemy would regroup, but confident that his crew, trained in silence and reflection, could face whatever came next. The legend of the mad submarine captain would continue, whispered among sailors, a testament to the deadly power of ingenuity beneath the waves. The morning was thick with a low-hanging mist that clung to the sea like a gauze curtain. Morton knew that the Japanese command would have been quick to report the loss of the convoy. Intelligence intercepted over radio frequencies indicated that destroyers from Rabaul had been dispatched in a systematic hunt. The Skate's advantage, its invisibility, would be fleeting. "Sonar back online?" Morton asked, though the question was rhetorical. The crew had learned to operate without it, and he preferred to rely on sight and instinct rather than machinery that could fail or betray them. Hawkins shook his head. "Depth charges have likely fried the main sensors." "We're blind, sir." Morton nodded, accepting the vulnerability. The Pacific was a chessboard of steel and shadow, and sometimes the only way to win was to become a ghost. He maneuvered the submarine slowly to periscope depth, careful to keep the hull obscured in the mist. From above, the Japanese destroyers appeared as dark shapes cutting through the fog. Each was alert, scanning the water with visual reconnaissance, each aware that a single torpedo could alter the course of their mission. The first contact came unexpectedly, a faint wake in the water, barely visible, reflecting the morning sun in a fleeting glint. Morton held his breath, calculating speed, distance, and probable armament. There were 3 destroyers, traveling in a loose V formation, likely searching the path the convoy had taken. Their captain, having endured previous losses, would expect a cautious enemy. Morton intended to exploit that expectation. "Silent running," he whispered. The order reverberated through the hull like a heartbeat. Every engine reduced to near idle, every crew member tense. The Skate became a living shadow, sliding through the water with minimal disturbance. Hours passed with no contact. The fog thickened and then lifted sporadically, revealing fleeting silhouettes of enemy vessels. Morton observed through the periscope, using the faintest reflection of light on water to track movement. The destroyers, trained in anti-submarine warfare, zigzagged unpredictably, dropping sound buoys and deploying depth charges. Morton anticipated these maneuvers. "Prepare to dive," he commanded. "Depth 80 feet. Hold position." The hull creaked under pressure, a reminder of the ocean's weight pressing in on them. Hawkins kept the periscope lens just above water, occasionally catching a shimmer from the destroyer's deck signal flags, or perhaps the sun glinting off gun barrels. Each flicker informed Morton's next move. By mid-afternoon, the Skate had drawn the destroyers into a careful trap. Morton had observed a predictable rhythm in their search, a pattern of advancing, circling, and retreating, based on sonar pings and prior experience. He calculated the timing for a counterstrike. "Load stern tubes," Morton ordered. "We'll strike as they converge." The crew moved with silent precision. The Mark 14 torpedoes had been adjusted to compensate for depth-running issues, a lesson Morton had learned from prior engagements. Every tube was calibrated to ensure that when fired, the torpedo would intersect with the destroyer's path at exactly the right moment. Hawkins reported faint glimmers on the water's surface. Morton studied them carefully, translating the reflections into distance and heading. He relied entirely on visual confirmation, a method deemed risky by some officers, but one that had served him well. The first torpedo streaked silently from the stern, tube, arcing through the water with deadly intent. Seconds later, a muted explosion reverberated across the surface as it struck the nearest destroyer, damaging its engine room. Smoke and steam erupted, masking the Skate's exact location. The destroyers responded immediately, dropping depth charges in a coordinated pattern. The explosions rocked the submarine, sending shudders through the hull. Crew members gritted their teeth against the concussive force. Morton, standing over the chart table, calculated the timing for evasive maneuvers. "Hard starboard, increase depth to 120 feet, he ordered. "Follow my mark." The Skate shifted with a smooth, calculated motion, evading the brunt of the charges. Morton relied on the subtle feel of the water, the shifts in pressure, and the faint vibrations transmitted through the hull to determine the destroyer's location. For an hour, the submarine danced through a gauntlet of sonar sweeps and exploding charges, moving as much by instinct as by calculation. During the lull, Morton allowed a brief survey through the periscope. The destroyers were frantically repositioning, firing searchlights, and deploying additional depth charges. They were determined, aggressive, and methodical traits Morton respected, even as he exploited their patterns. "Prepare forward tubes," he said quietly. "We'll need them to finish this engagement." By evening, the Skate had maneuvered to a position where it could launch an attack on the remaining destroyers without exposing itself fully. Morton had anticipated that the Japanese would attempt a pincer maneuver to encircle the submarine. Using the faint reflection of moonlight on the ocean, he calculated a firing solution that allowed for a single, precise torpedo to strike the lead destroyer as it advanced. "Fire!" Morton commanded. The torpedo hit with calculated accuracy, sending the vessel listing violently and forcing its companion to scatter. Morton ordered immediate, evasive maneuvers, diving to 150 feet and adjusting course to the east. The Skate moved through the depths with controlled grace, guided by periscope observation and the crew's practiced instincts. The Japanese, confused and battered, began a slow retreat. Their sonar equipment had been challenged beyond its limits, and their search patterns, once coordinated, now appeared random. Morton allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. His tactics had worked once again. By using light, reflection, and careful observation, he had turned the enemy's technological advantage into a liability. As night fell, Morton surfaced briefly, using the cover of darkness to ventilate the submarine and take stock of damage. The crew, though exhausted, remained disciplined, following procedures with the precision of a machine. Morton recorded the day's engagement in the log. The 29th of July, 1943. Engagement with pursuing destroyers complete. One enemy vessel disabled, remaining units evaded, submarine intact. Crew demonstrated exemplary discipline and execution under duress. Tactics relied entirely on periscope observation and reflected light, sonar not utilized. Enemy losses and movements to be confirmed through intelligence. Morton stared at the dark horizon, the faint glimmer of stars reflected on the water. He considered the narrow margin between success and disaster, the razor's edge on which they had navigated the past days. The ocean was vast, dangerous, and indifferent. Yet in that indifference, Morton had found an advantage, one that required audacity, patience, and an almost obsessive attention to detail. The crew settled in for the night, knowing that the next engagement could come at any moment. Morton remained at the periscope, observing the faint phosphorescence that traced the path of the submarine, a ghostly signature in a theatre of shadows. He reflected on the paradox of submarine warfare. The Skate's greatest weapon was not its torpedoes or steel hull, but its ability to vanish, to strike unseen, and to survive through calculation and instinct. The legend of the mad submarine captain was no longer whispered. It had begun to take shape, carried in reports, logs, and the uneasy respect of both American and Japanese sailors. Morton knew that each engagement tested not only his skill but his resolve, and that the Pacific was unforgiving to those who wavered. Yet, as the Skate glided silently beneath the waves, he felt the quiet affirmation that his methods, unorthodox, daring, and calculated, were as lethal as any weapon in the fleet. The night deepened, and the submarine continued its slow patrol, a phantom beneath the waves. Morton allowed himself one final observation. The reflection of the moon on the water, faint and fleeting, mirrored in the periscope lens. In that reflection, he saw the truth of submarine warfare. Invisibility, patience, and a mind unbound by convention could conquer even the most formidable adversaries. The Skate would live to fight another day, and its captain would continue to navigate the razor's edge, where light, shadow, and instinct combined to form a weapon far more dangerous than any torpedo. The sea had changed overnight. Where mist had once veiled the horizon, now the sun glared down on an expanse of restless waves, each crest glinting like fractured glass. Morton knew the Japanese had received word of the Skate's earlier engagement. Reports intercepted in the early morning confirmed increased patrols, heavier destroyer escorts, and the likelihood of coordinated air reconnaissance. The challenge before him was unprecedented. A convoy of 10 transport vessels, escorted by 6 destroyers, now moving south toward Rabaul. "Captain," Hawkins reported, voice tight with tension. "They're spread out farther than usual, zigzagging in pairs. Multiple escorts, probably depth charge ready." Morton's gaze lingered on the periscope lens. Every movement of the enemy ships was a reflection of their intent, a ripple on the ocean's surface that could be translated into a lethal pattern. "Good," he said quietly. "It means they underestimate us. That is the key." The Skate slipped into position, maintaining a cautious depth of 200 feet. The crew, exhausted from previous engagements, now operated with the fluency of shared intuition. Morton had trained them for these exact moments, the delicate balance of patience, observation, and audacity. The convoy advanced slowly, hulls cutting the water with mechanical certainty. Morton observed the rhythm of their zigzagging, the spacing between the destroyers, and the intervals at which depth charges were released. He noted each reflection in the water, small sunlit glints from railings, gun barrels, or the slight shimmer of painted hulls. Each fragment of reflected light was a clue to their course and speed. "Forward tubes ready," Morton ordered. "We'll strike the lead transport first." The torpedo crews prepared silently, adjusting settings based on estimated velocity, angle of approach, and current depth. Morton's calculations, executed entirely through periscope observation and instinct, allowed the Skate to position itself with exacting precision. The first attack was a success. A torpedo streaked through the water and found the engine room of the lead transport. Flames and smoke erupted, obscuring the vessel from the remaining ships and momentarily disrupting the escort's formation. Morton held the periscope steady, tracking the convoy's response. The Japanese reacted swiftly. Depth charges began falling like mechanical rain, explosions sending shockwaves through the water. The Skate's hull shuddered under each concussion, yet Morton guided the submarine with unerring calm. "Depth 250 feet. Maintain course." Hawkins and the crew executed his commands with exacting precision, each man aware that any misstep could mean disaster. Hours passed in tense silence, punctuated by bursts of sonar pings from the Japanese escorts. Morton refused to rely on his own sonar, preferring instead to interpret the faintest visual cues above. The reflections of sunlight off the water's surface, the subtle swell of waves against ship hulls, and the occasional silhouette became his instruments, replacing machines that could fail. By late afternoon, Morton had maneuvered the Skate into an optimal attack position. The convoy, unaware of the submarine's location, continued south, leaving gaps between the escorts. He aimed the forward torpedoes at a cluster of transports lagging behind the main formation. "Fire!" Morton commanded. The torpedoes raced through the water. Explosions followed in rapid succession as 2 of the transports were hit. Smoke plumes rose above the water, mingling with the haze of sunset. The escorts began a frantic counterattack, dropping depth charges in calculated patterns. Morton anticipated their movements, diving to 300 feet, adjusting ballast, and timing course corrections to evade the worst of the blasts. The tension inside the Skate was palpable. Every creak of the hull, every vibration of an explosion, reminded the crew of the thin margin between survival and catastrophe. Yet Morton's calm, measured voice provided a center of gravity in the chaos. As night fell, Morton surfaced briefly under cover of darkness. The phosphorescence in the water shimmered, tracing the contours of the submarine and leaving an ethereal glow on the hull. He took stock. 3 transports destroyed, 2 heavily damaged, and the remaining vessels scattered. The Japanese escorts, wary and battered, had begun a slow withdrawal, no longer maintaining coordinated formations. Morton allowed himself a moment of reflection. His strategy unorthodox, daring, reliant entirely on periscope observation and the subtle play of light on water, had succeeded against overwhelming odds. Yet he knew this was only a temporary reprieve. The Pacific was vast, but intelligence networks and patrols would soon converge on his location. Each engagement increased the likelihood of detection and counterattack. "Prepare to dive," he ordered. "Full, silent running. We move west, away from any likely pursuit routes." The crew complied, and the Skate slipped beneath the waves, a ghost moving through the darkness. Morton watched the faint reflections of distant searchlights from the Japanese destroyers, now more a cautionary signal than a threat. The submarine had survived another day, but the ocean remained unforgiving. A vast, shifting battlefield where one miscalculation could be fatal. Morton recorded the day's events in the log, the 1st of August 1943. Engagement with convoy south of New Ireland successful. Enemy losses: 3 transports destroyed, 2 heavily damaged. Escorts evaded, submarine intact. Engagement executed using periscope observation and reflected light only. Crew performed with exemplary skill under extreme conditions. As the Skate glided silently into the night, Morton contemplated the paradox of his method. By relying on something as ephemeral as light reflected on water, he had managed to outwit trained crews, sophisticated destroyers, and a fleet accustomed to technological dominance. The ocean, indifferent and immense, had been transformed into a battlefield defined by shadows, glimmers, and human calculation. The submarine would continue its patrol, guided by instinct, discipline, and the careful interpretation of light and shadow. The legend of the mad submarine captain would grow, not through bravado or reckless action, but through precision, patience, and an almost obsessive understanding of the sea and its reflections. Morton knew that each engagement tested not only his skill, but the resolve of his crew. The next encounter would come, as it always did, swift and merciless. Yet for now, the Skate moved through the waters of the Solomon Sea, a phantom of the depths, invisible, lethal, and unmatched. And beneath the moonlit waves, the reflection of the Skate's periscope glimmered faintly, a ghostly herald of a captain who had redefined the limits of submarine warfare. Morton knew that each engagement tested not only his skill, but the resolve of his crew. The next encounter would come, as it always did, swift and merciless. Yet for now, the Skate moved through the waters of the Solomon Sea, a phantom of the depths, invisible, lethal, and unmatched. And beneath the moonlit waves, the reflection of the Skate's periscope glimmered faintly, a ghostly herald of a captain who had redefined the limits of submarine warfare. Even in silence, the crew could feel the weight of history in their wake, each ripple of water a reminder that ingenuity, daring, and precision could turn the tide against impossible odds.